when somebody comes to you right away and asks about starting a project, and they bring up that question about the cost, and they just want to get an idea of it, what's what's sort of your summary answer for them right away? What is the first thing you want them to understand about this idea of budget and cost as they're going into it?
The big thing for me is for them to be as educated as possible about the entire budget. What makes up all the parts and pieces of the budget? And building a house is certainly the bigger part of it, but oftentimes people maybe don't keep in their forefront of their mind the fact that there are major price components associated with the land and the development of that land, which might be the utilities. Potentially, if there's special circumstances about the land, will impact the way the house is constructed. So a lot of times, just for them to understand that there's more to it than building the house. And so when they're preparing a budget, they need to not only have their head around the whole concept that a house costs a certain amount to build, but what about all the things that I need to do ahead of time to get it to that point? With the cost of the land comes also the determining the type of house that will go on that land. So sometimes it don't even necessarily pay to talk about the house until you know what the land looks like. Because if you're trying to do a slab on grade, but you're looking for a view property on the side of a hill, and you don't want a basement, you want a slab on grade house, and you want it all one level, those two elements are working in opposite directions. Mm-hmm. So like a view property is going to be best served with maybe a basement in multiple levels versus a flat site is great for doing a slab on grade house.
And would you say that that land variable is one of the first things you're asking about when somebody comes to you? And some people have their land ready to go. Yep. Some people don't. Mm-hmm. What's more common? What would you say? What place are most people in, and what stage are they in when it comes to
looking for land? Yeah. And so at that stage, that's probably the better stage to be at, because then you can really each of them assess what it is that, let's say they're nearing retirement age. Many of our clients are, and they look at the land that they want, and they want to have a very beautiful piece of land, and they want it to have a view maybe. But at the same time, they want the slab on grade house. So we have to definitely help educate them about that piece of land that they might prospectively be looking at to buy, and whether it would be suitable for that slab on grade house, just because of the idea of universal design. You can live in it at any age, whereas the multi-level house is going to be much harder to accommodate somebody that's maybe in declining health at some point, where they would have a little bit of trouble with stairs and multiple levels and things of that nature, and the maintenance of a sloping lot versus maintaining a fairly simple flat lot. Mm-hmm. So that, and then the utilities can come into a pretty sizable outlay, depending on what they are.
And what are with the utilities, what are you kind of looking at when you're, some people are probably going to be pretty set on, I want to be out in the country. Some people want to be in the city, and they're pretty confident in that. Yep. But for somebody who's maybe trying to weigh, rural feel versus, inner city or vice versa, what are some things to think about as far as
Well, in general, I'll say right up front that if you can hook up to the municipal city water and sewer in just about any jurisdiction, you'll typically be a lot less cost than you will be prepping a rural lot with a private sewer and water system. Mm-hmm. Private sewer in our area is typically a pressure mound system, and they go anywhere from, I've seen on the low side, maybe 18,000 to upwards of 30,000. And then there's other systems that might be like a hybrid system, and they can even be higher priced than that because of certain soil conditions they have to be instituted. Then compare that to a municipal water and sewer situation. The sewer in a city jurisdiction might cost under $5,000 to hook up to in some scenarios where the tap is already there at the street. With the water, similar costs are incurred in the municipal. A country well in a rural setting could be, another 15 to 25,000 is not uncommon.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
So those costs on the rural side of it are pretty significant. But for some people, it's well worth it because you're essentially getting what it is you want.
Right.
In terms of the larger parcel of land with some privacy, potentially some natural views and things like that.
Right. And so some people are probably, like that's well worth the cost for them. That's a great value,
right?
Because it's important for them to have that land. But for some people, that might be an eye opener. Like, oh, that dream homestead I was thinking about is
right.
There's a few more hoops to jump through than.
Yeah. And so these are all things that we're talking about that costs are incurred before you ever even really have a plan even fully, pulled into shape that, you could even do any pricing on. So that and the fact that the land itself is on the low side, 35,000 on the low side for a building lot. Mm-hmm. And that could be in the city or it could be a small parcel out in the country. And, keep going, 100,000 plus, 200,000 even. I've seen some of the properties go for in really sought after areas like along the shore of Lake Superior or the shore of a very nice lake. You'll see those kind of costs being pretty standard, to pay 100,000+ for the very nice lakefront property.
Yeah, there's a lot of probably people dreaming about being on the lake.
Yes.
What kind of challenges can be
that?
There for that?
Is a really major issue sometimes for people, especially where you have erosion going on. We live by the biggest body of fresh water in the world, Lake Superior, but it can be a pretty violent situation when there's a big storm in the November end of the year, typically even into December, lots of high winds and waves that can cause shoreline erosion, and a person has to be definitely fully aware of that situation. Some of the areas that aren't necessarily by Lake Superior, but they still have a lot of wind conditions that factor into the design, even as far as putting in the quality of windows and so forth so picking that land has got a lot of nuances. You want to go into it with your eyes wide open.
Does the kind of referencing back to the time of season, if you decide to start building in the middle of winter, can that drive the cost up for construction?
Yes. Snow-covered land is very hard to assess well, especially if you're going to have a private septic system, because they can't even do some of the soil testing that they should really be doing ahead of time because the ground's frozen. So in terms of determining the quality of the land, there's no doubt, just because of topography and stuff like that, you're going to see that whether it's winter or summer or anything in between. But the key there is that you would know whether it has these soil conditions or wetness, high water table, which we don't typically have a problem with. If there are wetlands on it, how does that impact the ability to get to your building site? It's pretty rare in the city that you would build on a lot with municipal utilities that could really impact this much at all, because you're going to not buy a piece of wetlands in the city to build on. It's going to be real obvious. But in a rural setting, when you're talking 5 or more acres even, and the spot you want to build on is maybe 500 to 700 feet back from the road, you could very well be faced with crossing a wetlands So you'd want to know ahead of time, what are the implications of that?
Right.
Meaning, can I even do it? Is there jurisdiction that says, or local government unit that says, what is going to be the protocol to be able to cross that wetlands, and if it's even allowable.
Mm-hmm.
So those are definitely big factors too. And then the engineering that can go into the soils work. One wants to be really aware of the soil type. The best soil types to build on are going to be, your denser, heavier type materials that aren't soft, and like organic materials, typically soft and has to be moved aside and replaced with sand or gravel to build on. Some soil conditions like clay can be built right on top of, just with minimal buffering of rock or sand.
Mm-hmm.
Ledge rock is another common thing that we run into. So with ledge rock, you can build on it, but there are certain engineering principles that have to be adopted to be able to meet the code requirements.
Right.
That now coupled with permitting and code, like I just mentioned, are factors too that can affect price. So typically, if you haven't done any planning in the prior fall and placed your sand, let's say for a slab on grade house, which we do on a pretty regular basis, and we blanket it after we've prepped it and compacted it, and then we can let the snow fall on it and then get an early start in the following year, typically February or March. And often we've done that. The house we're sitting in right now is a model home that we did that in. And that worked out really well to have that sand prep done and in, covered with insulation blankets and tarps by Christmas before it had a chance to freeze in that prior year.
Mm-hmm.
So then we were able to actually, with that prior planning, get underway in the winter months, which is actually a little bit of a slower time for us, which works well with our crews. And then the model home schedule, like with the parade, which was canceled this year due to COVID, but typically we would be in by May with the model home done. And so that's worked well.
Mm-hmm.
So, but there are higher costs in that there might be some frost in the ground that needs to be essentially heated and melted out of there.
And then the other thing you mentioned, I think briefly, was the driveway, depending on where you have to get to.
Yes, the driveway is not a small factor either.
Yeah.
In some cases, I should say. The driveway where we're sitting here is literally 50 feet long. It's not a major factor at all.
Mm-hmm.
But in a similar rural setting, like this house sets kind of in the woods, you could say, even though it's in a city, a lot of times when people are on a rural site, they want to get back from the road a ways just to kind of minimize that, I'll say, fishbowl effect, like
Mm-hmm.
have that ability to be more private, but yet kind of control your own, what you're looking at and what your view is like.
Mm-hmm.
So you take a 500-foot long driveway, you got something to say is for sure giving you the privacy, but the cost is pretty significant, especially if you look at improving it to like paved driveway or something like that down the road.
Can you give sort of an estimate of where that can fall in the range as far as a 50-foot driveway versus a road that you're going to essentially have to build to get to your
house?
house?
It's kind of like those dollars per square foot factor
Mm-hmm.
that come into play. And obviously the more driveway you do, and if the conditions are good and you're only putting a foot of gravel down because it's pretty good solid substrate that you're putting it on, maybe it's pretty hard clay in a well drained area, or it's pretty rocky soil
Mm-hmm.
and not like full of organic softer material, again, like I mentioned before, you could be in that $12 to $18 per running foot of 12-foot wide driveway, so
Mm-hmm.
$1 to $1.50 a square foot.
Mm-hmm.
And that's on the low side. That's if things are just perfect.
Right.
And then if you got to fill in a low area with bigger rock and stuff, you could easily double that number quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And that's based on, pretty good volume of like 100-foot driveway or longer.
Right.
It usually gets higher on the smaller installation because there's a certain amount of construction that just has to happen, the mobilization of the equipment, the hauling of the gravel and so forth,
Right.
that is going to apply regardless of what size you go.